That was the XFL, directed by Charlie Ebersol, who now joins me. This is a historical delight, the balancing of tongue-in-cheek with real football. If you sat down next to somebody on a plane and didn't have pictures to show, how would you explain in 2017 what the devil the XFL was?
I would tell them to go look at a Trump rally. The XFL defies explanation. I think the joy of doing the film was every time something even sort of felt like a lull in the story, something more insane would happen, and Vince and my father and everybody would just go bigger. It was the perfect marriage of marketing and I think big thoughts without great execution.
They were grand thoughts. Was this a football league that was designed to entertain, or was this entertainment that, oh, by the way, had some football?
Well, I think it was intended to be football. I mean, I think Vince's greatest skill set is that he listens to his audience better than anybody. I mean, he will adapt on the fly during a live show to what he's hearing. And he heard that football fans in 99, 2001 really felt like the NFL had forsaken them and had moved away from them, and he saw an opening. The problem is that his core skill set was to market the hell out of it. My dad's skill set was to produce ready-made television on a way that we've never seen before. Neither of them were experts at football, and they relied heavily on people to say, this is how we can get good football on the field. And what turned out to be was they had 28 days of practice before the kickoff of the first game, but 7 months of marketing. They probably should have reversed the polarity there.
But you'd grown up, you knew your dad's work, you'd grown up around the industry. You also were familiar with what Vince McMahon, even from your time as a young kid, you had watched him at work and seen how he could work his marketing marvel, and so certainly the odds were in their favor, you would think.
Well, I'd never seen either of them fail. I mean, when they first met, I was 4, and within 6 weeks of meeting, they created Saturday Night's Main Event, which went on to be the highest-rated Saturday night programming in decades. In fact, it's still the highest-rated Saturday night program of all time, regularly scheduled. And that show, I grew up being. I joke that Hulk Hogan was my babysitter because he was the last one that would go out every night. So I'd be in his dressing room, while my dad and Vince were producing it. And that marriage had worked. Vince brought the marketing and the storytelling, and my dad brought this whole new level of production value. They took that model and tried to recreate it in 2001. I think they just didn't account for the, no pun intended, X factor, which was the need for good football. And that was sort of their undoing. That and incredibly bad luck those first 2 weeks.
Obviously, they pulled out all the stops, and it's still circled the drain. As you watch, and you've produced, I think, and directed what's essentially a buddy film with your dad and Vince, two very successful men. How did they deal with the fact that very publicly this very volatile idea was blowing up?
Well, and that's the story I really wanted to tell. When I went to ESPN with the idea of them wanting to do an XFL film and the film I wanted to make, I was like, what people aren't going to realize is how deep this friendship is, and how that friendship is the only reason that the league both came together and then went away, because it really relied heavily on them being close friends for my dad to be able to say to Vince, like, this is dead and we need to walk away before it gets any worse. I mean, I do think the challenge my father says in the film, and he said for a long time, was he knew at halftime of the first game, the game put up a big goose egg, in terms of New York had 34 total yards of offense in that first game against Vegas. And once the audience saw the football wasn't very good, the assumption was, all right, well, let's sell the entertainment side. And that obviously, your core product has to be viable for any of the accoutrement to work. I think the tragedy of it was, had they, 3 weeks before the first game, they had decided together that they would switch from an Orlando game, which was going to be the first game, to this Vegas game. The Orlando game turned out like 34-37, tons of touchdowns scored, an incredible game, plus a lot of the violence they were promising. The Orlando game had none of the violence. New York didn't score a point and lost 19-0, which, by the way, was the only rout of the entire season. And from that point on, the 54 million people that tuned out from that point on. Because, why tune in to see high school grade football? Which it wasn't, by the way. I mean, there were really good games even that first weekend.
Yeah, but that was the perception out there.
Exactly. That first game they saw.
You've done the definitive history. We've seen what they tried. What's the wildest idea they dare not try, that they thought about but didn't try?
Well,
It's a dangerous question, I realize, but
The original plan for the Rodney Dangerfield thing is that they, in week 4 or 5, they allowed cameras to go inside the cheerleaders' locker room. Now, what they did is they based it on this skit that when my dad had created Saturday Night Live with Lorne Michaels years before, my mom had been on the show. That's actually how my parents met, was my mom hosted the show. And they did a skit where they went in the ladies' locker room and it was sort of a farce and a joke and whimsical, which is what they ended up producing. However, the original plan for what was going to go on in the locker room was not safe for television, is probably the politest way I can put it.
even in the 21st century, couldn't have gotten away with it.
I'm not sure that Showtime could have gotten away with it.
Wow, okay, even at night. It is a triumph of sports, of culture, of tongue-in-cheek and real football, and how to sell things to this country. We're going to talk about a little bit more, but Charlie, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it.